long way around. I'm your host, Malcolm Byrne, here at Radio Kingston, WKNY, 1490 AM, 102.9 FM, and on the internets at radiokingston.org. Tonight I have a very special guest, last minute, actually, my friend Keala. And Kelly is joining me from Hawaii, and Keala is an award-winning native Hawaiian filmmaker, journalist, and activist whose works focus primarily on the early 21st century Hawaiian sovereignty movement, indigenous peoples, and the environment. Her documentary, Noho Hewa, has been screened and broadcast internationally and is widely taught in university courses that focus on indigenous peoples, the Pacific, and colonization. Keala's expertise is on Native Hawaiian resistance to desecration, militarism, and federal and state trajectories of forced assimilation. She's a TED Scripps Environmental Journalism Fellow and has an MFA in film production from the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. Keala's broadcast journalism has aired on Al Jazeera, The News Hour with Jim Lehrer, and the Pacifica Network. Her published articles, commentary, and reviews have appeared in Indian Country Today, The Nation, Honolulu Weekly, and Honolulu Advertiser. Recently, Keala was quoted extensively in an NBC news article titled, "Why Hawaiian Sovereignty Has Undeniable Context for the Maui Fires." We'll be talking about that article and other issues around this devastating event. Keala was on my show last October to discuss her newly published book, Our Rights to Self-Determination, a Hawaiian Manifesto. And it's great to have her back with me tonight, all the way from her home in Moku Nui, or as it's known by many, the Big Island of Hawaii, where it's just after 2 p.m. So before I introduce Keala, we're going to play a track that she's requested by Israel Kama. Well, I'm going to ask you, Keala, to straighten out my pronunciation, but it's a track called Hawaii 78. So here we go, and we'll be right back with Keala Kelly just after this piece of music. So stay tuned.
Cry for the land that was taken away, and then yet modern city life. Tears would come from each other's eyes, and they would start to realize that our land is in great, great danger now. All the fighting that the king had done to conquer all these islands, now there's condominiums. How would he feel if he saw Hawaii?
That was a beautiful track by Bretta Is. So, Keala, welcome to the show.
Aloha, Malcolm, and mahalo nui for having me on the show. Even though it was a last-minute invitation, I appreciate it, and it's good to talk story with you again. It's been a minute.
Yeah. Well, you know, Liz had asked me, my fearless producer, Liz Hill. Thank you, Liz, for helping make this happen so last minute. But I was at home and I was thinking, God, like, why didn't I think of this like 2 weeks ago? But anyway, I wanted to ask you right away. I understand that you've been having some problems with the authorities giving you a hard time because of your outspokenness, especially right now. And what's that about?
I don't know. I don't know what you're referencing with regard to me personally, or I don't know.
I thought perhaps you were, they were like, don't talk about this stuff right now.
Well, I think that's a kind of censorship that takes place anyway. I mean, it's not, people don't call you up and tell you what they're about to do to you.
No,
but
of course.
I do want to say, even if we had, I don't think I could have talked about this 2 weeks ago, Malcolm. That's really how, before we really have a conversation about Lahaina, I just want to say that, I mean, it'll be 3 weeks on Tuesday since it happened. So I'm feeling a little more normal the past few days, but I don't know one Hawaiian person in Hawaii who isn't just picking themselves up off the floor. I don't even live on Maui. So imagine how it is for them over there, because this is really, I mean, this cuts so deep for so many of us, or all of us really, historically and culturally, and then just looking at the devastation of the place and the loss of life. So I feel okay talking about it, the past week, maybe past 5 days or so. But it's just like one of those things where you just can't even get your mind around it. It was so horrific.
Well, it's my experience having been to certain places. I remember back in, it was sometime in the 90s, there was this massive flooding of the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers at the same time, this kind of confluence bout. And I went out to Iowa, and, the news was kind of showing me the usual stuff. But when I got there, there was nothing that could, you couldn't, it was so much bigger than anything you can get on a YouTube clip or a TV screen. But nonetheless, I did see a very shocking and sad video just yesterday of a group of people like sitting right on a seawall on Maui with literally probably 200 yards behind them, like flames coming up. And they were just sort of, this was like their last resort, it's like being on the seawall, like right near the ocean. So I can't imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, we don't know yet. I'm glad that they finally released a list of names because it helped account for many, many people who were not missing. But even after that, there's still 388 people unaccounted for and 115 for sure that they can name who have, they've recovered their remains. But 388 is still like us, a lot of people to still have missing from that small place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's like 10% of my hometown.
And so, some of these people ended up being lost at sea because they did have to make a break for it to the ocean and they did drown. They suffocated. Some people in the water literally suffocated from the smoke.
Right.
And by the time the guard, the Coast Guard was getting involved, it was just like, just a nightmare for those people. It must have just been a terrible, terrible experience for all of them. So, I mean, even right now, as we're talking, I can feel my eyes tearing up. It's so wrong what happened there.
Yeah.
And it was avoidable, I think.
Well, let's dig into that idea right there, because that's one of the things I really wanted to explore with you is, the media, of course, as usual, tries to carry the government line, toe the line, so to speak. And it seems like there's a few things that are shockingly absent from the conversation, one of which is the issue of climate change, of course. And second of all is this historic misappropriation and devastation of Hawaii and the culture and the people, indigenous people in particular. So I'd like you to really expand on that, please.
Well, I don't think I can say in Hawaii, and this probably is true everywhere if you think about it, just in terms of First Peoples, indigenous peoples being removed so that, let's say, for instance, in the Amazon, they're being removed for mining throughout areas of the Amazon so that mining interests can go in there and either pull out oil or pull out gold or whatever the resource is. Or in Bolivia, they want the lithium. So there's that way of causing incredible harm to ecosystems that then are thrown completely out of balance, which leads to what we all call climate change. And so with regard to Hawaii and specifically with regard to Maui and West Maui, what's been done there is a case study on the devastation that's brought to a people in their own nation when the United States comes in and decides it's going to take it from them. Because our history here and the history of Lahaina itself, our history is as a nation state. And Americans have a very hard time hearing that. It's this story that is completely covered up, right in plain sight. That's a different kind of history to have. It's not just that we're the indigenous people. We also have this other layer of nation state status that the United States has been strangling and holding hostage for literally 130 years. So all that's been done to the Hawaiians since the overthrow 130 years ago, which was a U.S. military overthrow in partnership with a handful of white plantation owners. But it was the U.S. military that did it. Those plantation owners couldn't have done anything. It's the military, American. And so once that took place and then this puppet government was put into position, immediately they started changing land ownership, moving, changing like land titles. And it was, and on Maui specifically, the plantation era from even before the overthrow, but definitely after the overthrow, what they did to the land, what they did to the water was they they redirected the streams and the rivers and took water from one place to take it to another place to irrigate their own pineapple fields or their own, whatever else they were growing. And then, a few decades later, 50 years later, it becomes about tourism, right? It becomes about real estate. So then the same people take the same water and now they're irrigating golf courses and setting up hotels. So all of the things that have happened that have created the situation that makes West Maui so dry, that's all made by Americans. It's, one of the things I did say in that interview with Kimmy at NBC was that Lahaina is not American, but the fire is American. And I really mean that quite literally. Lahaina was the capital of the Hawaiian kingdom for almost 40 something years. And it was a hub. It was a major Pacific hub. It was a really important modern site. And even before that, it was a hugely important site for the Kanaka Maoli, the Native Hawaiian people. So we have these multiple kind of overlapping historical threads that link us to that place in some very difficult and specific ways. And most people just don't want to talk about it. Even if they do want to talk about climate change, for instance, they want to talk about it in the American legal issue about water laws. That's how they want to frame it. They don't want to start with, how did it get this way? One of the things, you might have seen some of the images of the fire, and one of them was a church called Wai'ola Church. And it's, showed up on many front pages. That church just celebrated its 200th anniversary. So, and it's a Protestant church, and built from when some Hawaiians started to convert, royalty, ali'i were converting to Christianity. So that was a really important church just historically, but the name of it should give you an indication of what Lahaina used to be. The name is Wai'ola Church, water of life. That place was verdant and green and had water, and it was just fertile. And if you were to see it, a day before the fire, you would think you were you're almost in a desert. And so it's been turned into that. So when we talk about climate change in Hawaii, we need to actually step back in time and say, okay, how did it get this way?
Right. So in a sense, just saying, oh, it's climate change, is kind of misleading. Is that what you're saying? It
is. It kind of falls into this narrative, which I find to be, I understand climate change is real. I'm not somebody that's going to say it isn't. But how it gets spoken about, when we talk about something like a Green New Deal, where are we beginning with these stories? It's like, if you're familiar with Thacker Pass, this is a really good example.
Absolutely, yeah.
of the devastation of a pristine area for some lithium that's supposedly going to save, the world because people can get electric cars out of it. Like, who makes this stuff up? That's not, you don't destroy more earth to save the earth. Like, just beginning with that logic is already so far gone that talking to people like that is a little bit scary. Well, so I find that a lot of liberal and neoliberal Americans really just think that way, like climate change, let's just stop, the oil flow. And then that's not the fix it. And by the way, the sitting president has, opened all kinds of leases for drilling. So it's just a kind of nonsense conversation that ends up happening. And when that comes to bear on a place like Maui or a place like Lahaina, the first thing that gets erased, Malcolm, is the Hawaiian story. It starts getting narrated only in this cultural way, right? We'll talk about the cultural, quote unquote, artifacts. Or it was the capital of the Hawaiian kingdom, and then the conversation will end there and nobody will talk about the overthrow or the occupation. And so there's all these huge literally manufactured right in front of me, holes in this narrative. And so how is it that Americans are ever going to really understand what happened to Lahaina if they're not even going to get the actual background of how it got that way? And it really bothers me that whether it's Hawaiians or non-Hawaiians in Hawaii or anywhere else, that they think Americans can't handle that. I mean, I saw the way it's getting narrated on Democracy Now! People think of Democracy Now! As like this really progressive news source.
Not at all.
But not when it comes to Lahaina. They completely leave out the illegal occupation. It used to be the War and Peace report. If you care about things like war and peace, you should actually want to know about Hawaii in this deeper way because it's that important in terms of American history and, environmental destruction and militarism.
I lost my faith in Amy Goodman when she showed up for a little photo op at Standing Rock. It's like, okay, I'm done with her. Oh. Anyway, as I often say to Liz, you can't make this stuff up. But yeah, let's dive back into the conversation that we were having right before that break and talk about these billionaires that inhabit the island and their role.
Yeah, right. There's there's two big billies over there. At least two big billies on that one island. We have a lot of billionaires in Hawaii. So let's say, I'm going to circle back to your original comment just for half a second. So Pierre Midyar started this thing called the Honolulu Civil Beat. That's a main news agency. It's a main news source over on Oahu. I can't get a job there to save my life. I tried several times, and I'm not the kind of Hawaiian they're going to hire. The only Hawaiians I hire are the ones who are not going to talk the way that I talk, even though I'm an experienced journalist and probably have more experience at the time that they started than any of the Hawaiians they ended up hiring. So there's a certain kind of very colonized narrative that happens here. So when a billionaire like that starts a news place and then it turns it into a nonprofit and acts like hands off, damage is already done. If you look at Zuckerberg, he lives on Kauai, and he is one of these billionaires that's gotten a lot of land over there by things like quiet title and just going around and I guess you could say buying people off to get land that should stay in the hands of Hawaiian people. And if you look at somebody like Ellison, he owns Lanai, pretty much 90% of that island. So you get over to Maui and we have a lot of millionaires there, multi-millionaires, famous people there who've been there for a long, long time. They're almost locals. People like Woody Harrelson or Willie Nelson, these guys have been there forever, okay? Like George Harrison pretty much could have been a local by the time, he passed away. He lived in Hana for so long. Same with Chris Christopherson. But then you have this other kind of population where it's these billionaires like Oprah Winfrey. She has 2,000 acres basically on the slopes of Haleakala. So, it was kind of interesting to see. And I don't want to forget about Jeff Bezos. He's recently purchased on Maui, like this entire, I would say it's almost like his own little private bay. So these people have so much money that when they show up, they just scoop it up and they just get away with it because everything's been turned into real estate here instead of what Hawaiians call it. It's our aina. The word aina means that which feeds you. Well, I don't think Oprah's 2,000 acres are feeding anybody. And I'm pretty sure nobody's doing any fishing over there where Jeff Bezos has set up shop. So when people like that come in, whatever is real estate, it gets even more expensive because now you've got these big deal billionaires and millionaires snapping up, big chunks of land.
Which naturally jacks up the price of real estate in general. So
exactly. It just changes everything. And it's only their fourth or fifth or 10th house. It's not like they really need it. I mean, who needs 2,000 acres, Malcolm?
Well,
and it's like I said, it's not like it's a farm or that's, it's not like people are working the land.
I could understand, if she decided to open a game reserve or
I'm going to assume some of that
or something.
I'm going to assume some of that land must be preserved land. And there's just no way it can't be. But it changed. It's like new colonizers. It's just a new way to colonize. So these people come in and they pretend it's the 50th state because they've been told it's the 50th state and they like it. It works for them that way because then they're not just colonizers. They're just regular investors, right?
Let's delve into that because I've had this conversation with people a number of times and it's a bit like, I remember many, many years ago, it was back in the late 80s and I was talking to somebody about I had just been on a road trip through, and one of the places that I drove through was Pine Ridge Reservation out in out west, and I was talking about that with this very nice person, and they said, oh, but everything's okay with the Indians now, isn't it? Like we've sort of made amends and given them some land and they're all fine. And I just looked at this person like, what on earth are you talking? Like, what cereal box did you read that on? And so recently I was talking about Hawaii, and I said, that this place, Hawaii, is never officially part of the United States. And they just said, what do you mean? And I said, no, it's not like Alaska or Kentucky or someplace where they, have a legal written agreement and there was an assignation and so forth. That never happened. It was just taken over. I mean, am I right? Am I wrong? I mean,
yeah, that's exactly the difference. It's a huge difference. And the only place that I know of where people, it's a little bit familiar to them, the story, is Texas, because they have their own history.
Right. Texans consider Texas, real Texas.
It's its own country.
It's like a republic. They say, it's a republic, not a state. But
right. So they have this certain kind of history so they can sort of understand it. But I think Americans in general, well, listen to what you just said about South Dakota. They see some natives and they're like, oh, they're okay now. Look at them, right? Like they don't have any sense of any of that history there. They see Hawaiians and they just lump us in with other indigenous peoples because it's just an easier way to narrate and not have to take responsibility for any of the damage that's ongoing. You see, that's the thing. Americans in general, and I think just people in general, because everybody's just trying to get by, right? Everybody's just living their lives. And, if these stories, these narratives are kept away from them, they're not going to go seek it. Who wants to go and find out how lousy their government has been treating them for 100 years? Like Americans don't know that they've been getting lied to for over 100 years about Hawaii specifically, and that is the foundation for the American military industrial complex, is that lie. And if you say that to people, they go, what do you mean? We saved them from Japan. Japan was bombing Pearl Harbor. Like they have no sense of, but what happened the 50 years before that to put that military in Pearl Harbor? How did it get there? Right.
Well,
and they don't
it also
it
totally ignores the fact that the United States placed a massive trade embargo on Japan, which kind of,
over oil,
sort of
specifically
gave them, it's a bit like a parallel to what's going on with Ukraine and Russia right now. People say, well, it's an unprovoked invasion of a sovereign territory.
God.
It's like, yeah, but there's this other story that goes back decades that you're not getting from the media. And unfortunately, the thing with Hawaii and the indigenous people there is they've kind of been written out of history, and what's been it's all been replaced with this Hollywood. Hollywood is so much a part of the propaganda machine, and it's created this image of, the hula hooping, nice girls with leis and their, just sort of, it's a caricaturistic view of these proud people who really have been written out of the, it's sort of an afterthought, Sorry.
Well, that's one of the things about mass media in general. Most of it is these days, it's almost all propaganda. It seems like it's very difficult to get actual information. You have to know how to decipher what's the coded message in there to really find out what's going on.
Got to dig real deep and hard.
And that's especially true with Hollywood, because that's just kind of propaganda central for the American narrative, whether it's about the Indians, the cowboys and the Indians, or those dirty Japs from World War II, boy, did we have to let them have it, right? Or any other militaristic narrative that's been invented since World War II to heroicize the Americans. In fact, you brought up Ukraine. That's an excellent example. Or even just Russia. Americans think of World War II and they think about, John Wayne or whatever. And gosh, we saved we stopped Hitler, or we saved Hawaiians from the Japanese, or whatever that is, right? They don't really think about nobody died more than Russians in World War II. Oh my God.
Well,
was it 20 million people?
No, more than that.
It's a crazy number of people.
At least 27 million Soviet citizens died.
That's a number that Americans cannot conceive of, right? Because the American narrative about World War II is something else. So it's very anti-Nazi. Yet, ironically, there's plenty of Nazis in Ukraine. And the way this is getting narrated, the Azov battalion is the perfect example. They're Nazis.
Azov.
And so, but Azov, right. And so it's
well,
like Americans.
I just actually, I have this habit of posting provocative things to Facebook and then getting banned. But whatever. And I just posted something today about a Ukrainian oligarch, Kolomoisky is his name, who happens to be Jewish, and he's a multi-billionaire, but it doesn't matter to me whether he's Jewish, except that he's the one that financed the Azov battalion, which are Nazis. They're not even neo-Nazis. They're actual Nazis. So it sort of makes you wonder, like, you know, because I've heard people say, well, there's no way there's any Nazis in Ukraine because Zelensky is Jewish. How could that be? But it's like, no, it doesn't matter. You know, there were Jewish leaders in the Warsaw Ghetto that, you know, worked with the Nazis hand in glove because they were making lots of money and figured they'd survive. And of course, the Germans were like, well, when we're done with you, we'll wipe you out too. And I kind of think that's what's going to happen in Ukraine. But not the real point of this is that the narrative of what's going on with Russia and Ukraine right now is missing a whole segment of historical background, much in the same way that the narrative about Hawaii is kind of written out of the story.
You're absolutely correct, number one. And number two, it's, you know, there's two things I would say about that. The truth about Hawaii is much easier to understand. I read about Ukraine. I read about what's gone on there just the past century. And it's hard to keep up. What's been going on in that region for centuries is hard to stay with. I mean, Russia was part of Russia until like 200, you know, for hundreds of years, you know, so that's why there's so many Russian speakers in Ukraine. But, you know, so it's a very complex history there because of its rich land, because it is so fertile, because of the fight over it. It's a much harder but important story. People need to know about that instead of just reaching into the part where it's easy for them, like circa 2019 or something. You know, at least understand the U.S. involvement there just a little bit. You know, that's been going on since the 90s, actually.
Well, the most important thing to understand about Ukraine is it's a civil war. It was a civil war up until, you know, March 22nd of 2022. It's a divided country. You've got the ethnic Russians, you've got the West-leaning part of Ukraine, and you know, to understand that it was actually a civil war is kind of the first important step to understanding that current conflict. You know, that's the media doesn't talk about these things; they ignore them, and you know, so
which makes you ask. We have to ask the question: why did they do that? You know, I think, you know, when it comes to Hawaii, it's a cover up of
same thing,
enormous proportions, but it's not that difficult of a story if you just look at it. It's pretty, you know, somebody like me can break it down in several paragraphs.
It's clear to me.
You know, people might not like it, but that's the truth of it, right? And so the thing about Hawaii that I think is really important is that I do believe that if Americans did understand it, especially after a tragedy like what's happened in Lahaina, they're going to be more inclined to want to see justice for Hawaiians instead of this ongoing injustice for Hawaiians. They're going to feel more able to have some kind of shared responsibility for it. You know, I don't know if you're aware of this, but, you know, so that you've got thousands of people that are displaced now in Lahaina. 2,000 structures were burned down, and that's pretty much was everything there. So I think between 10, maybe 15,000 people are, you know, without their homes, right? So some of them are in hotels, some of them are camping, and there's different things. And then you've got FEMA handing $700 checks out, and people are like, I can't do anything with this. $700 is a joke. And probably easily one of the most expensive places in the world. So I just read...
Well, you can't afford more than that because we're spending, you know, $120 billion in Ukraine.
Exactly. And a lot of people in Lahaina are like, wait, we're sending all this money to Ukraine, but nothing over here. You know, President Biden shows up, and it's like, why did he even do his layover? I think about it as he did like a layover there. And then he went back to Lake Tahoe.
I didn't realize he had even showed
He was
up.
there like a week ago for a few minutes, but or a few hours rather.
Little photo
but,
op.
You know, Hungary, a company in Hungary sent over 250 houses that can be like, you know, like they're flat, but
like a pop-up
kind
house.
of open them up and it becomes like a shelter.
Sure.
Pop-up houses. And this corporation literally put 250 of those, and they managed to commandeer a NATO plane to get it there.
Wow.
And I was like, well, this is the first time something as good is coming from NATO to us,
Right.
Like, it's like, and I thought, do you see the federal government doing that? Do you see FEMA setting up these houses for the people there? No, it's coming out of Hungary. A corporation in Hungary is donating. That's where this is at. Is that Hungarian people are helping us?
Well, having lived in New Orleans, and I wasn't there when Katrina happened, but my daughter went, and her mom went through it, and many of my dearest friends. And it's the same thing. I mean, the response, FEMA, it was pathetic. It was just. They might as well have just not showed up. I mean, they were almost like an obstruction in a sort of weird way.
Well, these, and you think that they would have learned from that. A lot of people, by the way, in Hawaii, remember Hurricane Iniki, which was, I think, in like the late 80s, that hurricane, and what it did to Kauai, and what FEMA did after that. So a lot of people still don't trust FEMA because of what they did on Kauai after that hurricane. So people aren't, and then plus FEMA guys are taking up space in the hotels where people who've just lost their homes should be.
Right.
And they're not there for free, by the way. They get paid to be there. Mm-hmm. So there were multiple problems and then mistakes made that allowed for this fire to do what it did. We still aren't sure about the cause of it. People are suing Hawaiian Electric Company. That's the target for the cause. But, I don't think it's actually been established exactly where it started. But I see these kind of legal things in motion, and I see institutional things. But I tell you, it blew my mind when I saw 250 houses showing up on a NATO flight from Hungary.
Wow.
Like, you can't make this up. And it's not like the U.S. Army is bringing anything from anywhere else over here. That's not even American. So to me, that just sort of sets up this other analysis, a really important analysis that needs to be had about why is that? Because I'll say this one last thing about World War II. The United States already was here occupying at that time. And they had a scorched earth policy for the entire archipelago. So if it seemed to the U.S. that they might not win against Japan, their policy was to destroy the entire archipelago. To many of us Hawaiians, especially, as far as I'm concerned, they still have a scorched earth policy about this place. They don't give a damn. The American government doesn't care.
Are there nuclear warhead installations on any of the islands that you're aware of?
Many, many decades ago, because of protests, not many decades ago, I'm going to guess about 2.5 decades ago, okay, let me just say this. Pacific Command, or now it's called Indo-Pacific Command, is located at Pearl Harbor on Oahu. This is a massive military complex. It's huge. Yeah. It's the largest military command in the world, is now called Indo-Pacific Command.
Well, we got to get ready for the next war with China.
Yeah, actually, one of the reasons the United States began and is maintaining its illegal occupation here is because it wants to completely dominate and terrorize Asia. That's been going on for over a century. This idea of, you said it yourself, they embargoed Japan. That's why there was a war. It wasn't because the Japanese were trying to go to war with Hawaiians, right? But Pacific Command is this massive installation. So all of these all the ships, the submarines, anything that's nuclear powered or nuclear weaponized comes into port. So what do they do when they're in port? They do repairs, right? That's why they pull into port. They pull into port to take a break and do repairs. Of course, there's nuclear stuff on Oahu. People don't want to talk about it because they don't want to think about it. But it's not like they drop off their nuclear weapons on their way into Pearl Harbor. They bring it in with them.
Right.
So there's always nuclear weapons in Hawaii.
Keala, let's talk about that funny statement that came out of our sitting president's slightly addled brain.
I dare you to read it.
You dare me to read it?
I dare you to read it.
Well, I'll read it. Let me see. I'm fearless. I don't care anymore. they can screw me, and I won't even mind. He said very plainly that the native Hawaiian history is gone forever. How do you respond to that?
When I saw that, I mean, if that was his response to the fire, was to, he must have read a couple of sentences about, for instance, an important center called the Aikane Center was burned down, and a lot of cultural artifacts were lost there. And he might have maybe seen that and thought, the entire history is gone. He
does get confused pretty easily.
Well, I thought, actually, I laughed and I thought he wishes, that would just be so much easier if it's gone forever. Our history is gone. Like, how obnoxious that was for him to say.
Yeah, it's an odd thing to say, because on the one hand, you could sort of take it as a sympathetic statement, but on the other hand, it's like, the culture's gone, so let's not worry about it now. Like,
he could tell you didn't give it any thought. It's like there's no thought, and that's why a lot of people. I don't understand why I just thought it was so odd. I still think it's odd. Okay, the state and federal response, whereas a lot of the local people are taking care of each other. Mm-hmm. I think it's odd the way that he didn't really. He said he had no comment on it because he was on vacation, and so people were kind of beating him up like that for a few days.
It was about Yevgeny Prigozhin or Vladimir Putin. He'd had plenty to say. He'd have got up at 4 in the morning.
Yeah, he would have had plenty to say about it. He would have thought about it too.
Was something to do with
and he
Taiwan,
didn't show up till 6 days later. And when there's that level of a catastrophe, if you're the leader, I mean, I still think the governor here, Governor Green, didn't do such a great job, and kind of started off with a wrong dialogue. But he showed up.
Right.
People showed up, but Biden didn't. And when he did, I just thought, I don't know. I had to kind of look away in a sense, because it's too little too late. And then he got on his plane and he went back to his vacation. And that's like I said, the policy of the United States with regard to Hawaii isn't good. A lot of people are walking around going, wait, why aren't they helping us? And it's like, first of all, Americans say, well, they don't help any Americans. So, get used to it. But for the people who live here, they don't really typically think in terms of, wow, that government really doesn't care about us until they're forced to really look at it for what it is, So I think, there's a lot that can happen, that will happen there, by the way. And I personally, I'm hoping that people just stop talking about rebuilding, because it really is just a mass gravesite at this point. And that makes it a sacred place. It's kapu now, as far as I'm concerned. But as people try to get out from under this, hopefully whatever people decide to do is going to be starting with the actual history of the place, and keeping justice for Hawaiians and Hawaiian culture in the same frame, and not pulling it apart. Because one of those things, by the way, is very fundable. Hawaiian culture, people will donate money to. Hawaiian justice, actually, in terms of the occupation, they're going to look away and, make it so that nobody even listens to you. They should be in the same frame at all times, these two things.
Right. Well, one's a feel-good thing, and the other's maybe I don't feel so good, so I don't want to think about that.
Right. The other one makes it so that people have to change, and people don't want to change.
Right.
They want to just keep the injustice going, because it's easier that way, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Look, we've got about 9 minutes left. And I for people who are perhaps listening and don't know the rich history of Hawaii and the Queen and the kingdom and so forth, and how that transition happened, I'd like you to re-educate not only myself but the audience, in terms of
how
the historical, the whole historical perspective of how it became, what it was and what it's become and how it happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, the history of colonization in the Pacific is connected mainly to Captain James Cook, the British military naval guy. For some reason, he's always narrated as some kind of an adventurer or a discoverer. He was out there to discover.
Look, I'm I was brought up in an Anglo-Saxon environment for the most part. I'm from Canada, and we've still got a picture of the Queen on our money. Well, I think they're going to have to put the King on there now, but we were always taught that, Captain Cook was this wonderful, great guy who made all these amazing discoveries, and these mean old people on Hawaii killed him because they were just mean old Hawaiians, but...
Well, you know what he did in Australia. It's the terrible things done to the Australian people, the Aboriginal peoples, of which there are hundreds and hundreds of nations there still yet. The genocide there for the British Empire and the theft that's still ongoing for those people. And then we're on the other side of the Pacific. Right. That's where he started, and this is where he ended, was on this island. But I think in terms of the project that became the Americanization of Hawaii, it started with when, the British started colonizing, and then, there's all kinds of nations. The Germans colonized the Pacific. The U.S., in terms of, by the time the Hawaiian Kingdom was established by Kamehameha the Great, I think most people have heard of him. He warred with his own people for many years in order to, quote unquote, unify the archipelago as one kingdom instead of, each island having its own autonomy. And by the time he established the kingdom in 1795, there already were whalers coming here. Captain Cook had died, however many years, 15, 20 years earlier. Like this had already, white people had already found their way here. Christianity didn't show up until right after Kamehameha died, but a lot was already changing for the Hawaiian people. And what Kamehameha did was he was, I think, modernizing Hawaii in a sense. And so throughout the 19th century, the ali'i, we call it, Hawaiian royalty, took their lead from what he had established. And by 1845, we had, I think it was like even in 1815 or 16, the banking treaty was already signed with the United States. The Hawaiian Kingdom had 90 embassies throughout the world, had treaties throughout the world. And the Hawaiian Kingdom was internationally recognized throughout the world as a nation state. The first state dinner at the White House was for King Kalakaua, the Hawaiian king. So there was this incredible history throughout the 19th century where Hawaiians and the Hawaiian Kingdom was recognized for what it still is, really, except it's buried alive under the Americanization of it. So that history is the history that Hawaiians still, we all know it because it was our great grandparents. It's not ancient history to us. Mm-hmm. Okay, this isn't that long ago. The Queen died in 1917. So by the time the U.S. overthrew the Queen and her government in 1893, that obviously changed everything. And for the next 5 years after that, the puppet government that it was recognized by the Americans tried for 5 years to pass a treaty of annexation through the U.S. Congress to annex Hawaii to the United States. Because in order to annex another country's territory, you have to have a treaty, kind of like if you think about Louisiana, the Louisiana Purchase. There's all these paper trails, as you mentioned earlier, about how something, Kentucky or whatever, became part of the United States. The paper trail for Hawaii doesn't exist because even the Congress then would not pass a treaty of annexation. The Hawaiians had made it very clear that we did not want to be American. And there's 5 years of fighting going on up there, and Hawaiians trying through diplomatic processes. Ultimately, the United States, being the colonizing empire that it was becoming at the time, went to war with Spain. And when they went to war with Spain, that became their excuse for occupying Hawaii so that they could stay at war with Spain and the Philippines. So that's when the U.S. occupation began in 1898, was because of the excuse was the Spanish-American War.
This was the time of Teddy Roosevelt, right? Was he?
The Spanish-American War was during McKinley.
Oh, right. But Teddy was very involved in the Philippines.
Well, he was involved with invasion of, Cuba and those kind of things, like, right. But it was McKinley was the president at the time. That's why, in fact, Hawaiians make the joke. There's a high school in Honolulu called McKinley High School, and there's a statue in front of it, and it's President McKinley holding what's called the Treaty of Annexation, because there is no Treaty of Annexation. As far as we know, that statute is the only Treaty of Annexation annexing Hawaii to the United States, because it doesn't exist. So Hawaiians, when we say it's an illegal occupation, when we say, show me the treaty, we're challenging the United States to prove jurisdiction, and it can't. And that's why they don't want to talk about it, because they know they can't prove jurisdiction. So once it's understood for what it is, then the United Nations has to step in and has to follow through with doing the right thing. And that's going to take the form of a plebiscite. But, until we're able to actually get that understood, it's just going to forever be covered up. I mean, I think I'm the only journalist in the world that can't seem to stop talking about it.
Well, don't stop, because, even if, I often use the metaphor of Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill endlessly.
Yeah, that poor guy.
Almost in futility. But as Mickey Rooney once was overheard saying when someone asked him what he wanted written on his gravestone, and he said, just write, I tried. That's all you can do. We may never see the change in our lifetime, but at least we can say to ourselves, well, we did our best, And
know the truth and don't forget it for convenience.
Yeah. Well, look, before you go, one last request. Just, I'd like you to plug your book, for the listeners.
Oh gosh, I haven't even thought about that for so long. I don't know if I can turn this into a plug. No, I got to be honest with you, Malcolm. I feel a little weird doing that right now because of what we've just been talking about. Okay. But people can go to my website and, if they're interested in my work, they'll find stuff at the website they can read for free. And then if they see something there that they want to support, that's great. Well, but I do want to say this.
I'll plug the book for you. It was a really great introduction to all of this for me to read that book. So
it is a primer for it. I do want to say this one last thing about Lahaina besides God bless Lahaina. I want to say about Maui in general, just so that people understand economically what's happening to those people there. More than 50% of that island's economy comes from tourism. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying people need to go over there and become tourists. I'm just saying that's how difficult it is for people here. It's like the economy here is tied to militarism and tourism. And now everybody from the shave ice guy in the parking lot to the guy who makes wedding cakes is going to be hurting for a long time. And the federal government could easily give them PPP loans, and they've made no such offer to them. So I just wanted to make sure that the audience knows, those people do need help, and the government should help them in a way that doesn't crush their spirit.
Well put. Well, Keala, it's been really great having you on the show and talking to you again. We have to do this more often.
Well, mahalo nui to you and to Liz for having me on, Malcolm. It's been sad, but I appreciate the time, to discuss this important situation.
Well, it's like that track by Breda IZ, the Hawaii 78, but it's very sad but beautiful at the same time.
And real and important.
Exactly.
Well, aloha to you, and we'll talk again.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll send you the link. You'll be able to hear some of the music from the next hour.
Okay, awesome. Okay, you have a great rest of it, Malcolm.
You too. Take care. Goodbye.
Weehaw.
Bye. Welcome to Hour 2 of The Long Way Round. I'm your host, Malcolm Byrne. And for the next hour, I'm going to be playing some theme-oriented music. This is a quick playlist that I put together in honor of my guest, Keala Kelly. So I'm going to play a couple more tracks by Breda IZ, Israel. And this first track is called I Ala'i. And he's such a beautiful singer. It's just really moving. I really describe the emotional impact it has on me. I hope you feel the same way.
As far as Hawaiian music and all music, it's not especially understanding what it is, but feeling the music. And in Hawaiian music, I think there's a lot of feeling that cannot be explained, so that's why it's important.
We the voices behind the faith of the Hawaiian nation, the Hawaiian race. Rise for justice, the day has come. for all our people to stand as one. Ela we the voices behind the face, the Hawaiian nation, Hawaiian race. Fight for justice, the day has come for all our people to stand as one. Ela power of the people is the people. Oka piko ke aloha oka aina, oka aina. We the warriors born to live on what the land and sea can give. Defend the birthright to be free. Give our children liberty. Ela ea 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 ea. Pakini alamihi, on the days of the alamihi way. Ikiko ika piko, kamana o kapoe. Power of the people is the people. The people ke aloha o ka aina, o ka aina. Born to live what the land and sea can give. Defend our birthright to be free. Give our children liberty. Ela ea 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 ela ea 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 ela ea 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 ela ea 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 ela ea. Hone ana ko reo e urelie I kahi manu no ai kai Ki ai makala e o ke kaha O ia kai wala na mali Ulili e ahana Lili e hene Lili e ahana Ulili ho I e hene Lili e ahana Lili e hene Ulili holo holo kaha kai e O ia kai walan alie. You know what? Hey, I'll get 2 verses. ahiko mai o pua kainima kaulana o ka waihai i ke kai Havana e ole alo mai ahiko mai o pua kainima e kiroi ya mauna kea kuahimi kukila kila e olelo mai ahiko mai o pua kainima mai ka puana kuahimi kukila kila e ole alo mai ahiko mai o pua
That was a beautiful track by Israel Kamakawiwo Ole, otherwise known as Brother IZ. Track was called Kaolana Kauai from the album Somewhere Over the Rainbow. The other day I was doing my usual explorating on the internet and came across a new track by one of my all-time favorite artists, Yusuf Islam, formerly known as, well, still sort of known as his stage name, Cat Stevens. He's got a new album out, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. There's a lot of religious overtones to it, but regardless of that, it's a beautiful record, and there's some really, it's great to hear somebody who is still, whatever the reasons, still absolutely inspired and doing it in a way that many artists of his generation have sort of given up the ghost, so to speak. They're just kind of regurgitating their old selves and playing the old shit. But this is a beautiful track here. It's called King of a Land, from the album King of a Land by Yusuf Cat Stevens.
If I was a king of a land, I'd free every woman and man. I'd let them go. Oh, oh, oh. I'd set them free to serve you. Oh. If I knew every fish in the sea and every bird in the tree, I'd hear their call. I'd hear them speak your name. If I ran the schools of this world, I'd teach every boy and girl. I'd let them learn the truth. Ooh. I'd let them know your glory. If I had the stairs to the sky, I'd raise my voice up there high. I'd want the world to hear. Your perfect words and thank you. If I had a mountain of gold, I tried to feed every poor soul and give them hope again, and let them taste your bounty. If I could reach every dream, I still would search the unseen to find a way. That leads us to your mercy. If I was a king of a land, I'd free every woman and man. I'd let them go. I'd set them free to serve you. There's a train on a hill, and it's standing very still. There's a chain on the wheel. There's a peace in the air, but it's headed nowhere, 'cause the earth just isn't fair. There's a road up ahead, and it's calling us to tread. But the people are too scared to move, so they just stay where they are. There's a man sitting down, and he's staring at the ground while the sun rolls around. Just a little boy running wild across the hills, kicking balls, skipping meals, and I had a friend. He was just like a brother, just a bit older, and he knew how to climb over walls. Then the bombs came down on my small village town. As I looked around, it was gone. Mama called our names, Father never came. Life was never the same from that day on. So I ran over roads, over rocks and rubble, asking everybody, have you seen my friend? He was just like a brother, just a bit older, and he used to pray. Then a white-haired man took me by the hand to a broken mosque where he lay. He was still alive, eyes fixed on the sky. As he saw my face, he smiled. Then he passed away on that long sunny day, as the golden rays went down. So we dug some sand, buried him in that land. Now I understand his way. separates our souls, one that we must all leap one day.
I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air.
I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air. I can see him now floating on the air, floating on the air, floating on the air.
That was Yusuf Cat Stevens, the boy who knew how to climb walls. For that, Train on a Hill and King of a Land from the album, the new album, King of a Land by Yusuf Cat Stevens. A little while ago, my friend and occasional guest on this show, Scott Ritter, came back. He did a tour of Russia, well, a book tour, I should say. He wrote a book, wonderful book called Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, which recounts his adventures as a weapons inspector back in the 80s when sensibly both Russia and the United States had a nuclear arms treaty, ICBM treaty, to limit intermediate ballistic missiles. After Ronald Reagan watched a TV show and when it was about a nuclear strike, and it sort of portrayed all these horrific things that would happen. And when he apparently got finished watching the program, he asked some of his advisors, "Is it really going to be that bad?" And they said, "No, sir, it's going to be even worse." So even Ronnie got it right now and then, and so he immediately decided that, along with the help of Mikhail Gorbachev, that it would be a good idea to try and limit the number of weapons. So the idea was that it would be one for one, one of ours for one of theirs. So Scott's team went over to deep inside Russia to a facility that was dismantling ballistic missiles, and his job was to make sure that they had been disarmed and denuclearified. And anyway, his book was a number one seller in Russia just recently. So we went over there to do a book tour, and they filmed a Russian film crew followed him around, filmed him. And so when he came back, he very excitedly announced to me that he wanted to make a film called Waging Peace, which he's definitely, knowing Scott, absolutely going to do. No matter what the logistics are, he will achieve it, as is his way. And as soon as I heard that, I said to Scott, well, if you're going to, when you are going to think about music for this thing, I'd love to contribute. So although it's none of this is formalized, I sort of took it upon myself to do some recording of my own, on my own, in my house, in my studio, with the idea in mind that some of this music might be useful for that film. This is a piece that I just finished. It's called Destroyer of Worlds, parentheses, I am become death, which is the famous quote from the Bhagavad Gita, as relayed by Robert Oppenheimer when he was recalling the moment that they exploded the first nuclear weapon. So there's some voices in this thing. You'll recognize Robert Kennedy and Vladimir Putin and so forth. So here's the world debut of this track. I hope you enjoyed as much listening to it as I enjoyed recording it. So yeah, I think so. Here we go.
defending our own vital interests. Nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. To adopt that kind of course in the nuclear age will be evidence only of the bankruptcy of our policy or of a collective death wish for the world. To secure these ends, America's weapons are non-provocative, carefully controlled, designed to deter, and capable of selective use. Our military forces are committed to peace and disciplined in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility, for we can seek a relaxation of tensions without relaxing our guard. And for our part, we do not need to use threats.
Гибнут люди, сотни, тысячи мирных людей. Но в то же время возникает вопрос, разве мы должны безучастно и безвольно взирать на различные внутренние конфликты в отдельных странах, на действия авторитарных режимов, тиранов, на распространение оружия массового уничтожения? Именно, по сути, это и лежало в основе вопроса, который был задан федеральному канцлеру, нашим уважаемым коллегой, господином Либерманом.
It was the voice of reason.
hard to achieve it, cause freedom founded on taking others' freedom is not freedom. But that's the kind of freedom they praising and make appealing. On all other kinds of freedom is crazy, dangerous dealings. Spray your brains on the ceiling for entertaining the meaning that's political, physical, spiritual, and it's healing. Cause freedom is difficult, it requires a critical mass of the population not following all the typical propaganda of criminals, media subliminals. In fact, it ain't even subtle no more. It's just pitiful, literal mass killers dining on fine dinners while preaching to us about freedom like we are sleeping.
Free your mind, free your goals, free your time, free your soul. We got all that on the week. We got all that on the week. Free your mind, free your goals, free your time, free your soul. We got all that on the week. We got all that. We want our freedom. Yeah, we want our freedom. Yeah.
Listen, I wanna be free like the number. When I feel like to wonder, don't wanna feel like I'm under, but oversaturated. My imagination can wonder. Your boxes and categories is something I won't succumb to, cause I'm a freedom hunter, a truth terrorist, a lie killer. Me and the caller wrap this pen inside 5 fingers. It's musical medicine. Who would wanna collide with us? We fighting the spiritual war. Can I get a third eye witness? More fire, more power. The war's ours. I could free myself from all these doubters that I've been down with. But the biggest enemy ain't the cowards in my surroundings. My biggest enemy is the enemy. I'm astounded. Gotta
free your mind, free your goals, free your time, free your soul. We got all that on the week. We got all that on the week. Free your mind, free your goals, free your time, free your soul. We got all that on the week. We got all that. We want our freedom. Yeah, we want our freedom. Yeah.
If knowledge is power, then tell me please, what is freedom?
Can you define a single word that has a million meanings?
And if you mean it like I mean it, do we really need it?
Is definition another prison that we believe in?
Can you be free of prison sitting in the cell?
Can you be free of the system while you're living in hell?
Can you be free of division? It's too difficult to tell, cause we're going round in circles like a dog chasing its tail.
Time will tell if we'll fail, if we live to tell the tale, if we'll ever break the spells that they're telling this world and get free. Free from depression, free from oppression, free from the lies that they tell us in the history lessons. Free.
Free your mind, free your goals, free your time, free your soul. We got all that on the week. We got all that on the week. Free your mind, free your goals, free your time, free your soul. We got all that on the week. We got all that. We want our freedom. Yeah, we want our freedom. Yeah.
Well, folks, it's time to say goodbye. Ran out of time. Had a lot of fun doing this. Thank you so much to Liz Hill, my fearless producer. And thank you very much to Keala Kelly for joining us at such short notice. Wish you all the best. And we'll be back next week. Good Lord's willing, and the creek don't rise, as Garth Hudson used to say to me. Meantime, stay tuned for Freedom Highway coming up right after this here on Radio Kingston.